This is Ari Koretsky, and welcome to Jews You Should Know, introducing the broader community to interesting and inspiring Jewish men and women making a difference in our world. Some are already famous, some not yet so, but each is a Jew you should know.
And we are back with another fabulous episode of Jews You Should Know. Now, I'm not really in the habit of interviewing what we would call influencers, so to speak, that are out there in the Jewish world. However, every so often you meet someone who shares a personal story that is really, really inspiring and who's not just about life on social media, but is really an activist in the community and someone who accomplishes a great deal in our three-dimensional world. Alexandra, or Alex Fleksher, is just one such person. She has an extraordinary and fascinating life story, but she's doing so much today on the contemporary scene with respect to raising the profile of observant Jews, to answering some of the noxious stereotypes that proliferate both online and in wider society. And she's also a widely published author writing on important contemporary Jewish issues. So very excited to bring Alex to us today. A little bit of deviation from Israel-based coverage, but worth it nonetheless as a welcome, I wouldn't say diversion, but help us feel elevated and inspired during a difficult time. Meanwhile, as always, a reminder to follow us on social media at Jews You Should Know, spell that fully on Instagram and Facebook, Jews You Should Know with the letter U on Twitter. Follow or subscribe wherever you may be listening, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and so forth. Rate and review, and please share the podcast with friends and family. And now to our conversation with Alexandra Fleksher. We are here with Alex Fleksher. She is the host of the DMC, Deep Meaningful Podcast. There we go. Deep Meaningful Conversations podcast. There we go.
There we go.
And DMC. And she's also the is proprietor of the Faces of Orthodoxy social media accounts. And she also has a remarkable and interesting personal life story. All of that we're going to get to. But how are you, Alex?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Ari Koretsky, for having me. Great
having you on. And Alex is actually somebody I've known for quite a few years in like a more of a personal context, and reconnected. She came to speak on my campus, one of my campus programs last year, and but really been following her a bit from afar and watching all the amazing work, which is so exciting. But of course, it didn't emerge in a vacuum. It came from a whole background and a whole history that you have in your own life, which is, talk about orthodox, it is quite unorthodox. So let's hear a little bit about that, Alex. Where were you born? What was your early childhood like?
Sure. So I was born in Manhattan. My parents actually are immigrants. My father's from England and my mom's South African. And my dad always had this like American dream that he wanted to move to America and, you know, raise his child as an American. But I think the question that they had is, what religion would I be? My mom in South Africa went to a convent. She, you know, while they were, you know, in South Africa, you know how it's like a little bit more traditional. So like they would have Friday night and light candles, and they actually would go to an Orthodox shul where there was a mechitza, which sounds strange, but that's so much how South African Jewry was. But on the other hand, her mother, my grandmother, was like a self-hating Jew and a Scientologist. So it's a little funny. I guess they were a little confused. So she ended up, you know, marrying this non-Jewish man. And the most amazing part of the story, which I'm sure we'll get to, is how through his journey, his spiritual self-discovery, he brought my mother back to her Jewish roots. But my favorite story about, you know, when I was younger, in terms of them deciding if, you know, I would be Jewish or raised as a Christian, was I was sitting in my high chair, and this was in the Upper East Side of Manhattan. I must have been 2 years old. And my father did not know, you know, are we going to raise her as a Jew or a Christian? And the story that he tells us, he looked over and saw me. And he said he looked into my brown, deep Jewish eyes, which were actually what he recognized in my mother the first time he met my mother. She was the first Jew he had ever met. And he calls out to my mom, "She's Jewish." And my mother runs to the kitchen and she's like, "What? I'm telling you, she's Jewish." And my mother said, "Listen, I know that the religion goes through the mother. So, okay, I guess you're right." He's like, "I don't care about that. I know that she's going to be a Jewish person, a Jewish woman." And the truth is, they didn't know what to do with that. You'd think like, okay, she's Jewish, so now we enroll her in a Jewish school or we get her educated. And you tell me when to stop. But that's a whole story of how they actually figured out, that confusing piece for me in my childhood of like, what was I? So fine, they said I'm Jewish, fine. But what does that even mean? And what is that going to look like practically?
That's fascinating. So I do want to get to that story. But first I want to get a little bit deeper into the earlier background, because I guess both of your parents, it sounds like, were South African.
No, my father's British, actually.
Oh, your
They
father's
met in
British.
South
Okay.
Africa.
They
Yeah.
met in South Africa. What was he doing there?
So his brother lived in South Africa and convinced my father to come visit on vacation. South Africa is an extraordinary, beautiful, beautiful country. And my dad went to visit and he met my mother at some party overlooking the ocean, and it was this like amazing, moment where he really connected to her. He explains that it was actually his Jewish soul that was connecting to her Jewish soul. They said she was the first Jew he ever met. And he always said, like, the eyes are the window to the soul. We, of course, know in Judaism that that is the truth, that the eyes are a window to the neshama. And he met her there, and that was it. They started dating. My mother brought him home. Her father told her, "I told you to never bring home a guy." Can you imagine? And she turned around to him and she's like, "You put me in a convent for my education. What are you talking about?" And he was this successful art director in London in advertising. And he clearly loved my mother, and they shrugged their shoulders and said, okay. And that they got married by the justice of the peace. My mother it was just a government type of ceremony, totally, not religious. And my mother said, on our 25th wedding anniversary, I want a proper wedding. Who knew what that even meant? And fast forward 25 years, when my father converted in Atlanta, Georgia, and they needed to have a second wedding. Now, as my father is a Jew marrying his wife, that was on their 25th wedding anniversary. They had a proper Jewish wedding.
Wow, what a prescient story. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
You said your maternal grandmother, she was Jewish, but she was a Scientologist. Where did that come from?
Oh my gosh. Again, like these Jews are just spiritual seekers, and sometimes they're
just hanging out with Tom Cruise, I guess,
I know, right? I don't even know how she got into it. She used to talk about her Meshuggah grandmother that would stick knives and forks into the backyard. I think that was some kind of koshering something. I don't even know, but she had a lot of prejudices against Orthodox Jews. She passed those on to my mother, who so much so when we were joining the Atlanta Orthodox community, I was 12, and my father started getting interested and schlepped my mother along. She would be like, oh, those Orthodox women are baby making machines. And she was a product of the 70s. So between that and her mother's, negativity towards Jews and Orthodox Jews, she had a lot of stuff that she needed to get over in terms of breaking stereotypes, particularly about Orthodox women. And she did, because she met the most amazing woman who broke all those stereotypes for her. She started learning, and slowly, she was all in. But it was really, my father who was the one that opened the door. But my father told her when he wanted to convert, he's like, we love each other, we have an amazing marriage, but I'm telling you, I have to do this. So either you're coming with me or you're not.
Wild. So it's interesting, because I know that some of the work you do today also surrounds kind of that stereotype busting kind of work. And so it seems like sort of echoes of your mother's own journey.
Yeah, I do think so. And I think that's the whole point with stereotypes is they're stereotypes because we don't know the people. And there's so much fear around people that we don't know. And that's what bias is all about. But once you actually sit down and meet the people that you have stereotypes about and have conversations and learn about them and learn their stories, like you immediately see the humanity in people. And you immediately learn that these are real people with real stories and journeys, not just like some Orthodox woman, as my mother would say, who was a baby making machine, for example. She met women. My mother was a stylist in advertising. That means she did set design and wardrobe for TV commercials and ads. So she was very immersed in that world and certainly had, great appreciation. I mean, she dressed models and actors. That's what she did all day. So she always felt, Orthodox women were schlumpy and, didn't care about how they looked. And then when she met Orthodox women who were put together and beautiful, that was also a huge stereotype breaker. And I think the lesson there is just we have to be ourselves. We don't even realize that just by going to the supermarket and, being who we are, someone could look at us and be like, oh, interesting. That person's Orthodox. That's not what I thought an Orthodox person looks like or does, you know? So,
Absolutely. So let's get back into the story about your own father's conversion and all of that. So obviously there was some kind of an odyssey from this, being married to a Jewish woman who was, sort of anti-traditional and not engaged in her own religious heritage, and this non-Jewish, this goy, as your
yeah.
grandfather said, who was British and in South Africa and married to this first Jew he ever met.
Yeah.
How did that evolve into to where they ended up, that they had a 25th anniversary Jewish wedding?
Yeah, right. So they decided to move to New York. My father, as I said, from his days actually as a young child during World War II, he lived in Dover, had always this like affinity with the American GIs. And as a young child, he knew he wanted to go to America. So they moved. And then when they figured out that I was Jewish, probably about a year later, I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia. And it did not translate into actually how I would be educated. In fact, my mother took me to a Christian prep school like St. Timothy's to enroll me in their preschool. And she said she walked into the doors of this institution and there was a huge crucifix on the wall. Okay, this is for my interview. And she just walked right out. So there were moments where her neshama, her soul, was sort of like crying out, like, you did that. You went to a convent. This is not for your child. Once even my father got nostalgic over Christmas and he's like, let's just go to church. And I remember this, like I must have been in like fourth grade sitting in the pews of this church, like during mass. And my mother stood up and walked out, like couldn't do it. However, we had Christmas every year. I invited my Jewish friend, Sarah Stein, down the street to come decorate the Christmas tree. I saved the angel for her to put on top. She, in fact, became religious.
Wow. What's up, Sarah?
Later on. I know, Sarah. Shout out to Sarah. And then, we had Easter eggs and my mom made Passover seders. So we were this and this is very normal, in the secular world, this multicultural family. But quote unquote, I was Jewish. However, decided to put me in a Jewish school, Hebrew Academy, this like community Jewish school in first grade. My the Hebrew teacher was this Israeli woman and went around the class asking everyone what their Hebrew name was. And she came to me and I was like, I don't have a Hebrew name. So she gave me my Hebrew name. This Israeli lady, my name was Chaya. She named me in that first grade classroom. And I started getting more connected. I came home, they gave us a challah for Shabbat, and I would talk about lighting candles and having the challah. I got my first sitter there. My mother came and decorated. We had a whole sitter party. And the truth is, cognitive dissonance is very powerful. My parents saw me getting excited about Judaism and Shabbat, and they were like, well, we don't do that. So they pulled me out. And I was doing well. They actually pulled me out. They're like, we are not living that life. Crazy.
Wow, that's a plot twist. I thought you said so they started getting more connected.
I know, right? They just pulled me out and they stuck me in a very good public school. We lived in a very good district in Atlanta, good public schools. And my father then on his own started his journey. But I will tell you before I get into that, it's so interesting. Like as Orthodox Jews, chinuch and Jewish education, it's just so primary. We spend tens of thousands of dollars on tuition. We do whatever it takes to making sure our kids have summer camp experiences, whatever it takes to give our kids a strong Jewish education and Jewish identity. And I remember in public school, I was in like a fourth or fifth grade. It was holiday time, and they made an announcement on the loudspeaker that it was Hanukkah that year first, and the Jewish kids should come to the office to pick up their Hanukkah, their holiday present. And I literally didn't know if I should go to the office to pick up a Hanukkah present or if I should wait until Christmas. I literally did not know if I was a Jewish or Christian. Can you imagine? It's like, I remember my friends were like, Alex, no, you're Jewish. You should go get it. And I was like, I'm really not sure. And I ended up going to get the Hanukkah present first. But it's sort of mind-boggling that a child wouldn't really even know how they identify, right? Like in their religion. But I think was a pretty well-rounded child. Like even though that was the case, like I didn't really know, but like went with the flow. And then when my father started getting more into Judaism, he actually went from conservative to reform. The reform rabbi he really liked He actually studied with the Atlanta Scholars Kollel, which is in the Orthodox community. But my father wanted more, and he was like, "Oh, is there a Saturday Shabbat services?" And they're like, "No, we don't do that. Like, no one comes. Everyone's at the mall or at soccer games." And he's like, "Okay, I know there's more to Judaism than this." And he started exploring Chabad, and he would sit in. He was the perfect student. Can you imagine? You could appreciate this as a rabbi who's an educator. He's sitting in these classes. He's like lunch and learns with these Chabad rabbis. 12 people around the table. And my father's very like passionate and a spiritual seeker. And he's like, "Rabbi, I don't understand. You are sharing the secrets of the universe in this room. Why are people not banging down the doors to come into your class?" And he just soaked it up. They never became Chabad, but Chabad actually was a very important entry point also for my mother. The Rebbitzins in Chabad are so fashionable and put together. And that was very important for my mom in terms of breaking a lot of the stereotypes. Ultimately, he made his way to Beth Jacob. That's the main Orthodox shul in Atlanta. He found out about it. Rabbi Emmanuel Feldman, who's the founding rabbi of that community, was the rabbi there.
Been on the podcast, by the way.
Oh, amazing. Yeah. He's an icon. And this was in the early 90s. And he would park a few blocks down the road, come into shul and just sit there. And he loved it. And he would come home and he'd say to my mother, maybe just one night a week, we'll just like sit down and have a family meal together. And those candlesticks from your grandmother, maybe just light them. It would be really, really nice. And my mother said, "I know what you're doing. You want us to, have a Shabbos." And he's like, "It just would be really nice." And we started sort of doing that on our own. We didn't live in the community. Very soon, my father was sort of like all in. He schlepped my mother along. We came to the shul for Shabbos. We drove. that Atlanta's, you can't park in the parking lot, but it's a very much a open kiruv community. So there are people that drive to shul, and they go. And slowly but surely, my mother started slowly warming up. My favorite story I'll tell you about the challenges I think my mother had to overcome in terms of this journey is we went to a Seder. The whole community, you have to understand, just opened their homes to us. They invited us for Shabbos meals. I mean, that was so crucial because we were learning about the community and learning about all these amazing people through these Shabbos invitations. It changed our life completely, but we got a Seder invitation. So we drive over to the Seder and it's like the man is sitting at the head with his stacks of Haggadahs to his right and his left. He's just slowly going through everyone. His wife is sitting next to him, falling asleep. And this is how not to do kiruv, he's elbowing her to wake up. Okay. My mother is sitting there dying. And my father is sitting there eating the matzah, looking like a yeshiva bacher. His eyes closed, so much kavana. He's all into this. Okay. Finally, 2, 3 in the morning, we get in the car to drive home. And my father says, "Beverly," that's my mother's name, "I had this spiritual experience eating the matzah." My mother's looking at him with gritted teeth. And he says, "I was eating the matzah and it felt like the dust of Egypt in my mouth. I was there. I was there leaving Egypt." And of course, we all, as you're listening to the story, hopefully there are bells ringing. This is the ideal level of the experience of the Pesach Seder, is that you yourself should feel that you yourself left Egypt. And he had these remarkable experiences the first time he did started mitzvahs, the first time they lit Shabbos candles. This was another one that his soul plugged in immediately. He'd have these remarkable, strong spiritual experiences the first time he observed things. Of course, it has faded ever since that. But this is one of these things, and he's just going on about the spiritual experience with the matzah. My mother finally chimes in, and she starts screaming at him. And I remember we were driving home. I was sitting in the back of the car. I'm an only child. And she's like, "Did you see that woman? She's the slave. He kept on waking her up. She kept on going to the kitchen. She just wants to go to sleep. And by the way," she threatens him, "if you ever wear tzitzit, I'm telling you now, I am divorcing you." So we say, my father resits, my mother comforts her. She dresses modestly, she came around. But that was a memorable story.
What do you think precipitated your father's interest to begin with? What kind of sparked it? I mean, he obviously was, I would say, quote unquote, complicit in pulling you out of Jewish school. So something must have happened to jar him to take an interest?
Yes. So they pulled me out when I was in first grade. When I was in fifth grade, my father actually had a near-death experience. He had a burst appendix and pneumonia. He was in the hospital. The doctor said he was dying. My mother used to bring me to visit him in the hospital after school every day. And that's his story to tell. And he himself actually speaks all over the country. He's given over his story. But essentially, it was a real eye-opening moment for him. His spiritual experience where he realized that his life was off center in terms of the balance of physical and material in the world. And he knew from then that he needed to change his life. He does speak, and he always did speak, that he felt he had a Jewish soul. So I think there was sort of like that event precipitated him exploring. He also was always a spiritual seeker. He actually was a Methodist lay preacher. He did the backpacking through Europe and backpacking through the Middle East. I'm getting it wrong. The Middle East in his 20s. Like, he was always a seeker. But I think that moment sort of pushed him to explore more. And, you know, the amazing thing about this story is I said earlier, like, he always had this desire to come to America. When he converted, I was 12. I actually was the flower girl. I walked down the aisle. The whole community joined together. My parents actually had a second wedding where they, had a band, and people gave, all the families that opened up their homes and had us for Shabbos meals, gave my parents wedding gifts, like, a challah board or a Havdalah set, just like as if they were giving a new couple the things that they need to build their Jewish home. It was absolutely remarkable. But at his ofra, okay, he tells a story that when he was a young child and when he first met these GIs, they'd be throwing these candies. They were lifesavers, colorful lifesavers, off of the top of their Jeeps. And all the British children, wartime children who hadn't had candy, would be running after them. My father actually wrote this piece up in Mishpacha magazine this past Pesach. And they would run after the Jeeps and say, "Got any gum chum? Got any gum chum?" And that was like this moment of him and connecting with these GIs and looking at them and their bright pearly smiles. I'm thinking, I want to be one of those people one day. I want to go to where my true identity, who I am, is where these people come from. And at its ofra, before he knew it, he said the bracha, and there were all of these colorful candies flying over his head, the red, the yellow, green. They were sunkist, not lifesavers. And that was that full circle moment where he said, you know what he really wanted when he met the GIs, when he thought he wanted to find his true self in America, that actually came true. He was finding his true Jewish self, his true identity in America. And that was a very, very special moment for him.
That's incredible. It sounds like your parents must have been a little bit older, both when they got married and when they had you, because I'm just crunching some numbers here.
I know.
If he was around as a child to get those candies from the GIs, he must have already, and then it sounds like their 25th anniversary, you were only 12, right? So,
yeah. Actually, it may have been the 20th anniversary. I need to get that straight. But my father converted, I know for a fact, he was 54 years old. He's 10 years older than my mom. So he turned his life around. And that was one of the things that actually Rabbi Alon Feldman, who is Rabbi Emmanuel Feldman's son, he had come to the pulpit. He took over when my father started really getting interested. And my father was the first person he converted. Now he's converted many Jews. People come to him often. But that was one of the things that puzzled him. He's like, listen, it's not like you're getting married and your Jewish mother-in-law is breathing down your neck to like convert. Like, why do you want this? You're 54 years old. You have a successful career in advertising. Like, why do you want to turn your life around? So it's pretty remarkable.
Wow. And that must have, I don't want to say, in a sense, put a little bit of pressure on you in terms of your own life, being an only child after many years of their marriage and marrying a little bit later to begin with. What was that like, for you? Did you feel that growing up, kind of a heaviness that you had to, really live up to some kind of a standard?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I feel like my parents were this success story, Baal Tshuva success story, if you will. I was always part of this journey with them. It never was like my father's converting and schlepping us all along and, oh gosh, I have to switch schools and I have to change my life. I switched to a Jewish school, Torah Day School of Atlanta, when I was in sixth grade. So on one hand, that was actually helpful because it was pre the teenage years, pre the whole conservative reform bar bat mitzvah scene. So I wasn't like enmeshed in that social scene. So it wasn't really hard for me. And, when I switched over, you have to understand, I was in a top public school. My parents, was putting, tried to put me into like a Catholic prep school. I mean, they switched me into Torah Day School of Atlanta, which was in a strip shopping center, like next to Tuesday Morning. Okay. Now it's a really solid day school. It was a, growing basic school in those days. And it just says so much to my parents, how they were like so willing to even lower their standards to a certain extent. And what I mean by that is sometimes we do things because we believe in a bigger goal and a larger vision, and we will make sacrifices because sacrifices are necessary for any goal and principle that we really believe in, because we cannot have it all. We just can't. And I think one thing that one of the teachers did for me when I was switching over is she made this it was an English teacher. She's like, oh, there's a new girl in the class. They're becoming religious. She made this little pizza party for me one night. And that was so significant. I'll never forget it. I got to meet the girls in my new class, and it just made me really excited. And I never felt like I'm doing this for my dad. I felt like my father put me on a journey of my own. Interestingly, I think as I got older, let's just say like post high school, that's when I needed to realize that like I need to have a journey of my own that's in a sense separate than my father. I need to stop aligning myself or identifying myself as like the daughter of my father who converted, but I have my own real journey that I need to traverse. But yeah.
So where did
I
that
felt always connected.
So where did that journey take you? Where did you start going? After I guess high school and so forth. It sounds like you went to a conventional Jewish high school in Atlanta, and at that point your family was religious. So where did you then go?
Well, I'll step back if you don't mind, if I can tell you a little bit about high school. So I went to co-ed yeshiva high school, and it was a fascinating thing because I had like FFB from birth girls in my class, and it's a co-ed environment with kids who also are like conservative. It's just like a community kind of school run by Orthodox people. And my Orthodox friends, it was high school. So they're teenagers. So they're sort of exploring, and they would be doing stuff that I was not comfortable with. And I feel like I was able to thrive in that environment because I was on my own journey. And I used to say like, oh, why would I do XYZ that my friends were doing? That's like what not religious people do. I'm religious now. And having a journey, and I always say this for parents of teens, like teens have to take ownership of their own journey and their Judaism. And because I took ownership of mine and had goals for where I wanted to be, that really helped keep me on the path and didn't sway me to get me involved in stuff I shouldn't have been getting involved in. And, in this kind of environment, I remember standing up to go across the lunchroom to wash for hamotzi, for bread, was literally a walk of shame. We were called the Orthodox just by the fact that, listen, we weren't dorks, but we were Orthodox. So that already identified us as like being othered. And it took such strength of like character and conviction to be physically observant in this kind of environment. And once I always felt like a little self-conscious about it. But once I remember I was walking through the cafeteria doors, rushing to go to a class, and the other direction comes in the most popular boy in the school in my class and like slams into me. Okay. Running at the same direction. And like, boom, I'm on the floor. And he ran up to me. He's like, Alex, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I, of course, think he's apologizing to me because he ran into me and I fell on the floor. And then the next words out of his mouth were, I'm so sorry I touched you. And I was Shomer Nagia. I hung out with friends who were boys who were also Orthodox. We did NCSY together, but we were completely, observant. And that moment, like, I realized, like, oh my gosh, I'm actually respected for what I do, even though I look like such a freak, but I'm actually respected for keeping to my principles. And that was really a huge moment for me. And basically throughout high school, like I was on this mission to improve my skills. I felt like I was at a disadvantage in terms of, my reading and my translation and my, Chumash and learning skills. And I went on Mechlel at NCSY. I was there where I really was able to focus on my learning, to catch up. I was very involved in NCSY. I was on national board in 12th grade. I was, I think, a national NCSY of the year. Like it just was.
Alex, me too. What year was that?
Yes. I think we're in NCSY together. I do. I graduated high school in 98.
Guess you're 2 years behind me.
Oh.
But I was on national board in 96.
Oh,
at
that's so
NCSY of the
funny.
year. Not to,
Oh,
little
wow.
flex there, but okay.
I know. I think my first job, I got a master's in education. My first job, I actually put it on my resume. I was like 21 years old. It only happened a few years before. I was very proud.
You want to hear something funny right now? Just like a full circle moment is,
Yeah.
there was a woman who was the president on my board, and she, whatever, we obviously lost touch over the years, but then fast forward now, and her daughter right now, as we're recording this, her daughter and my daughter are co-counselors at their camp together in
Wow.
Camp Sternberg. So it's just really funny how life comes around, and
Yeah,
25
it's pretty
years,
amazing.
30, almost 30 years later. But
Amazing. So yeah, so then I went to seminary. I went to Dar Chaibina, which was like a real step up. The boys in my class who were, from NCSY made fun of me that I'm going to come back with a black hat. I definitely went to like the most like religious seminary. I don't know what I call religious. I don't know, left of Beis Yaakov, whatever you want to call it.
right, which is just so ironic. It just shows you how relative everything is, right? In the world, people tell me, oh, they're so religious, and compared. And sometimes people say, oh, they're so not religious. And I'll say, oh, you mean like they don't keep Shabbos? They don't. No. I didn't mean like people have such, people are in such niche little areas in terms of their vision. It's funny.
Exactly. My Beis Yaakov daughter did not apply to Dar Chaibina because it's not Beis Yaakov enough. So like, there we go. Maybe that gives some perspective, but it's so true. And, I'm just like super motivated. Like I love learning. Like, and I remember we had this Naomi, some girls would come in with like pajama pants under their skirts, and I'd be, what are you doing? I was really high on life. But I do remember like once in a shiur, and we had to read out loud. I think it was Gur Aryeh, to the head of the seminary, the rabbi, and he called on me, and I read it perfectly, and he was shocked, and he's like, "Wow, Alex, that was really good." And I sat there, and I'm like, I made it. Like I caught up, I did it. Like no one would know that. When I was 13 years old, I hardly could read Hebrew, but look at me now. And after seminary, I went to Stern College. I got a degree in English communications, and really trying to figure out my life. I wanted to teach. I decided I wanted to teach. My ideal would be to teach English because I am an English major plus Judaic studies. So I got a master's in secondary Jewish education at Israeli, which is the YU graduate school. And I was very blessed. We lived in Baltimore at the same time. My first teaching job was in Baltimore at Beth Tefillah. It's a community school. I taught there for almost 10 years. My alma mater. Oh, really? You went there?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
Wow.
K through 12.
I didn't really. Oh, this is interesting. So you know this school?
I know it
so
quite
I taught
well.
So I taught middle school and then high school. The middle school I was teaching English and Judaic studies, and then high school only Limudei Kodesh Judaic studies, and it was pretty amazing. That's sort of where I ended up.
Wild. So funny, that kind of a school, it's such a small school, and it really leaves a major impression on you because the people you grow up with, and you kind of marinate in that world for years. Just yesterday, it's just in my mind now, I was driving along. I was actually taking my daughter to go see July 4th fireworks. We're recording this on July 5th. I'm sure we're releasing much later, but so July 4th fireworks going out to DC, and I see a license plate with a nickname on it. And I turned to my daughter and said, it's so funny. A kid that I grew up with my whole life in Beth Tefillah, K through 12, that was his nickname in high school, growing up and in high school. And then I saw a couple bumper stickers that kind of like gave me a sense that it could have actually been that person, but I haven't spoken to him in like 20 or 25 years. And I said, I'm going to speed up a little bit and try to see who it is. I zoomed up, and it was actually that old classmate of mine. Wow. He rolled down our window, like, hey, what's up? Like, and then the light turned green. That's
crazy.
And that was it. It's just,
wow.
It's just a, crazy world we live in.
Yeah.
But that was Beth Tefillah alumni. I grew up, my class was 32 kids. So it was, a small group, and, many of them had been together our entire lives. So, wow. Beth Tefillah is a fascinating institution, which deserves its own, maybe its own podcast. But anyway, yeah. So you were in BT, you were teaching, and then I guess at some point, I know you got married, and that's what brought you to Baltimore, right?
Yeah. So I met my husband, actually a boy I went to high school with, Yogi Robkin. I'll give him a shout out. I feel like you also know Yogi.
Yogi, I know, sure. We used to play tennis together, and yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Yogi, he grew up in a very conservative, really founding kind of conservative family in Atlanta, Georgia, got involved in NCSY. And then we were, we would all go roller skating together in NCSY, like we were our little chavra. He's the one who told me I would have a black hat when I came back from seminary. So he ended up
Joke's on him because he's the one who came out with the black hat.
I know. So he ended up in Ner Yisrael, where my husband, who is a Baal Tshuva, also. Although funnily, it's weird. I don't consider myself a Baal Tshuva, which is strange because I am. But I guess I went so much through the system. You know what I mean? I went to seminary, I went to Stern. I don't know. It's funny. I don't even consider myself. But anyway, so he had a Shabbos meal with my husband at Ner Yisrael and then called me. And I was like, Yogi Robkin, I don't talk to boys anymore. Like, why is he calling me? It's like, I had a meal with this guy. I think that, I think this might be a shidduch for you. Yogi since has made I don't know, maybe even hundreds at this point of shidduchim, of matches. But we were his first. And
I remember even in Baltimore when they were just married, he would he had designated hours. I forgot about this. They would have designated hours where the people would come meet them, would come meet them at their apartment. And I think it was in Fountain View. And right?
We took over their apartment, actually.
Oh my gosh.
We lived in there.
And they moved to Dallas, right? So so I had not thought about that in so many years, but that's really funny that I remember they did a lot of matchmaking and did not know you were the first
I was their
notch
first.
on their belt.
And it's sort of convenient with someone who knows you that you went to high school with, things of your shidduch. So we moved to Baltimore. My husband was learning there in the Kola. I don't think that was on my agenda to be a Kola wife. It wasn't something I was aspiring to do. But I mean, as you can see, I'm pretty idealistic. I was all in. And when you think of Kola, you think you need support. I just want to say our rent. What was our rent in cross country apartments in those days? I think it was went up from 500 to 690. When mine was
$465.
Oh, wow. Old school. And I was teaching full time. We did it on our own for 5 years. And my husband decided, I think year 3 after our second child was born, that he was going down the community rabbi track. He substituted at Beth Tefillah a few times. He was sort of exploring education and the rabbinate. And then he decided through a mentor that had a long talk with him that he didn't want to do any of that anymore. He thought he should do something else and maybe medical school.
He is Jewish.
I guess so. So that became a whole new route where it's okay, you dropped out of college. He went to a prestigious college, Amherst College, dropped out to go study a year abroad in Israel, landed up in a kibbutz where they were having pork roast on Yom Kippur, which then made him realize that he should explore his Judaism more, and ended up in Or Sameach and learned in Israel for years. Came back to Ner Yisrael. And then after a number of years learning, where, by the way, when I asked Yogi, is he a Baal Tshuva? Because I was curious, he said, oh, no, he's not a Baal Tshuva. He was in the top shir in Ner Yisrael, and people did not know that only 3 years before he did not speak, he could not read Hebrew. It's just remarkable. So then he decides to go to medical school, but what does he have to show for it? He gets his bachelor's in Talmudic law. And this is what many people do. You get the BTL, you take your prereqs. He took all his science and, whatever prereqs he needed. And at his medical school interviews, one program director stood up when he walked in the room and said, you were the first rabbi who has applied to our medical school program. And when they asked, well, I see you went to Amherst College. Very nice, but you didn't graduate. Oh, yeah, I decided to change careers. I decided to go to rabbinical school instead. There's always a way to fit these things. So after supporting my husband for 5 years in Kollel, then I became the medical school wife, and I need to continue to support him. He went to University of Maryland Medical School. All this time I'm teaching at Beth Tefillah, thanks to my salary and medical and student loans, which you can get to help, living expenses loans and all of that fun stuff. And then we ended up in Cleveland for residency. So came here. You talk about Beth Tefillah is a very unique institution. It was sort of hard for me to transfer where would I teach when I came here. So I ended up, there was an opening at the most right-wing Beis Yaakov school here, not for Limudei Kodesh. They would not hire me for Judaic studies, but for English. And it happens to have been really my most fulfilling years teaching. I just absolutely loved it. And I slowly started getting into writing, and right now I'm not teaching. I left teaching. It's a whole nother discussion because I'm actually really passionate about education. I have a opinion column in Mishpacha magazine that I write for occasionally, and I wrote 2 years ago, really before there was a lot of discussion about the teacher shortage. And I am an example of why there's a teacher shortage because I left. I didn't want to grade at night, wasn't getting paid very much, and it just got too challenging. But nonetheless, I love teaching, but I did leave and I started writing a little bit, writing for some like blogs that I had always read about, cross currents. Probably it's like Adlerstein writes about like Jewish communal issues. Like I was the kid that was like reading the Jewish Observer front to back, and just slowly started writing. And then I remember like pitching to Mishpacha saying like, at that point I had somewhat of a name recognition, a little bit of name recognition. And I felt it was very important to have a female voice in the main magazine in the opinion section. Because I think, they do an amazing job with the Family First magazine for women, and they do an amazing job addressing communal issues there too. But I felt that, in the main magazine, there should be a Orthodox female voice. And, I got a column there, which was amazing.
How did you
really
land that?
Now.
Was there any resistance to that? How did you?
Okay, so it's very interesting. I needed to send some, samples of work that I had done, which I did. And I think what happened was sort of in the beginning, there was this feeling of like, our readers are going to have to learn to trust you because in the frum world, you have a certain clout because you're a rabbi, you're a rebbitzin. I'm a writer. I'm not married to a rabbi. I'm not a rebbitzin, although my husband does have smicha, but you know what I mean? I was just, and if you can imagine in any secular paper, you have opinion writers, they're writers and they gain the trust of their audience just by being good writers or because people agree with the words that they're saying. From worlds, it works a little bit differently. And there was a little bit of pushback when my first piece came out. You have to understand, like, this is right in the beginning of the magazine. This is with like esteemed and venerable writers, Eitan Kobry, Jonathan Rosenblum, and then Alexandra Fleksher, who is that, and there was a little bit of some reader pushback right in the beginning, like, who is she to say that? Who are you? What gives you the right to make these observations or, share these opinions? And I just think, over the years, I've been writing there for almost 5 years now. Over the years, I think, you just have to gain a trust with your readership, and you see from letters they write or, that people agree or they disagree, whatever it is. But I think over time, I believe I was able to, create that kind of trust. But yeah, it's been an amazing experience, and I so value. I don't write enough for them. I'm very busy with Faith of Orthodoxy, my podcast, which we could talk about. But it's a huge platform. It's just so special to start conversations around people's Shabbos tables, and then get those letters back and see that, like, you're actually making some kind of difference in that Orthodox communal conversation.
Incredible. So now, obviously, all along this time, and certainly the last 5-10 years, I guess 10 years or so, social media really began to explode, and you entered the fray, so to speak. And,
yeah.
And,
for good or for bad.
Added your voice there. Mishpacha is very, traditional brick and mortar, Jewish publishing magazine. It's kind of a, an updated version of that. But at the end of the day, it has very, clear roots in the Jewish publishing world. Social media is a whole new chapter, and with a whole different kind of audience, probably as well. How did you end up making your voice known there, and what did you decide to begin to champion, on those platforms?
Yeah, well, social media, I entered it pretty late. I'm sort of the type that will resist the fads until I oh gosh, finally have to join. I think my mother convinced me, you should check out Facebook. They're like, your friends from high school are posting pictures, and that's literally how I got on it. And then as a writer, Facebook is really helpful because you can share links to your articles. There has been over the years a lot of discussion about the algorithm and how it doesn't benefit writers and limits sharing external links, limits exposure. But, in those beginning days when I was writing for Cross Currents and Times of Israel in the forward, you could share a link and now your audience is so much bigger. Same with Mishpacha, by the way. They have a fabulous website, and I always would share my articles that were in print on social media platforms, and I continue to do so. So that's great. And I guess, being that kind of person that cares about communal issues, all of these platforms are just great ways to have conversations. And I think that's sort of where it started. I don't know. I just deleted my Twitter. Just now. Love-hate relationship with social media, that's for sure. But I guess that sort of leads into the work that I do now. Well, the truth is, I guess we should talk about my unorthodox life, because that's sort of where things exploded.
Okay, let's get into it. I mean, I know from your own story that I'm familiar with. Basically, my unorthodox life was this sort of reality show expose by a woman currently named Julia Hart. Excuse me, she, I guess, spoiler alert, was someone you knew in your time in Atlanta as one of your teachers, and I guess maybe that was sort of an entryway for you to start sharing a different perspective on Orthodox Judaism than was being portrayed on her show. Is that a fair synopsis?
That's exactly what happened. Up until that point, I'm not an influencer. Whatever I'm sharing in terms of my work or just having conversations on social media. But what happened was, so Julia Hart was my teacher. Her name in those days in Atlanta, she was in her early 20s. Her name was Talia Handler. Brilliant woman, BJJ graduate, came into class first day, designer top to bottom, moved from Muncie, and we're like, who is this person? Like, we're not used to people, women that look like this, her into fashion so much and designer and all of that. And like already from, in those years, that was who she was, certainly very, immersed in that kind of world. And she was like one of my first role models in terms of like really a strong Orthodox Jewish woman, brilliant photographic memory, very strong in terms of her educational approaches, Jewish approaches. Like, she told us we couldn't have slits on our skirts or go to movies. And we were like these co-ed Yeshiva high school going to NCSY, we were like, what's going on here? But basically she made my Sheva brachos. Actually, we were close. Last touch. And then I'd heard that she had stopped being religious. And honestly, my heart goes out to her and my heart goes out to anyone. I know that like she had got into shoe design, and I was like, okay, like I see maybe she always had this attraction for that world, and maybe that was part of her story that she really just wanted to be part of that and felt like she couldn't be that as an Orthodox woman. I don't know, but not judgment, just like my heart went out to her. And then I saw that she posted on her Instagram that she was starting to promote this new show that she was going to be releasing like 6 months down the line. So I messaged her on Instagram, hey, it's Alex Beard, remember me? Of course, Alex, how are you? It's so nice that you reached out. I'm wishing her well with her new show. As the publicity came out, I was reading everything I could about the show. And I saw very, very quickly that it was promoting a lot of stereotypes and negative information and untruths about Orthodox Judaism and Orthodox women. And in like the few days and weeks before the release, this is 2021, I was already thinking, like, I had moved more into like the Chizuk field, I guess you should say. In my writing, I'm like giving Chizuk to Orthodox community. I was a co-founder of the Cleveland Chizuk Retreat for Orthodox women. It's a learning retreat and sort of like a getaway for Orthodox women. So I really care about the Orthodox community. So like looking at this show and what it was doing, I was concerned for not the outside world. I'm not even thinking that. I was just thinking about like us or our teenage girls or women who would watch this and hear things degrading us, fundamentalist Orthodox women who are baby making machines, as she says, and who don't. I read an interview in the New York Times. She said, don't get an education past 16 years old. Like, don't ride bikes. Like, complete lies. Okay, what's that going to do for us? So I was like, you know what? As I said, I'm no influencer, but maybe we can utilize social media. And I wrote up this sort of Google Doc with some key points to this campaign that I thought maybe people can just jump on board. These viral things, like, what are the odds of something going viral? You know what I mean? I was like, let's just try. And, basically the idea is, the goal is for us, men and women, and it only have to be women, to showcase our lives as Orthodox Jews. A slice of life, slice in the daily life of any of us. We could discuss our challenge. We could discuss what we love about it. We could discuss how we break stereotypes. Put a picture of yourself, your little story, hashtag my Orthodox life. And I did this post the day it was released. The show was released, season 1, episode 1. I shared it with a couple of influencers because they can help. Can you share this too? They shared it, and it was like literally lighting a match. It just blew up wildfire. For the next week, I'm embarrassed to say I was like glued to my phone. And women just started posting, sharing pictures of themselves, sharing their stories, hashtag my Orthodox life. Women who were lurkers on social media or never put their pictures were like, I'm all in. And basically what happened is you have this community of Orthodox women worldwide who were extremely triggered by the show and frustrated and had this energy and wanted to share and wanted to have a platform to express themselves, but didn't know how. So we gave them that platform. And it was a crazy week. USA Today interviewed me with Julie Hart, not on the same phone, but had an article interviewing me and her. Apparently she was not happy, thought that article was biased and leaning with, sympathetically to us over her. We became the Orthodox response to the show. There was tremendous media coverage. And there are now almost over 3,000 posts on Instagram with this hashtag, my Orthodox life. If you scroll through them, you see this diversity of Orthodox women who all are identifying as Orthodoxy and all telling their varied stories. I think one of the coolest parts about this is how I wasn't even on LinkedIn, how it exploded on LinkedIn. And there are a lot of Hasidish women, yeshivish women on that platform there for their businesses. And when you're on LinkedIn, you've got all of your secular professional contacts. So yes, the world was reading this and they were getting a different narrative about who we are from individuals telling their stories. I have no problem with Julia Hart telling her story. Everyone has a right to tell their story. The problem I had and have with the show is her message that her story is our story. Her message of, I'm leaving this and I'm throwing a match behind me and burning the building down. The generalizations and statements and tropes that she says about Orthodox Jews is just simply, this became a matter of misrepresentation. And we were being misrepresented as Orthodox women in the media, and this was how we could fight back, is through social media and our own posts.
Really fascinating. I mean, did you ever hear back from her at some point saying, "Hey, what are you doing?" or "You're messing with my show"?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to do that. My husband told me, like, for sure, don't get involved. There's all legal mess, I'm sure. But I had people reaching out to me from the Atlanta community. She was teaching women in women's learning programs. I had Rebbitzins who were like very upset and sad who wanted to talk and process with me. It was hard for those people who knew her and grew up in Atlanta and saw her differently than the way she was portraying how she lived in those years. She, her husband was a lawyer. She read magazines. She was like, a little bit more with it than the, cloistered woman who had zero exposure that she portrayed herself to be.
So now that obviously that show itself and the, like any show or media product, kind of has its moment and then it burns itself out. So you don't hear much about that anymore. At least I don't.
No, you don't. It was literally 2 weeks long. It's just so viral moments don't last more than that.
Right. So where did that kind of leave you? I mean, that could have just been a one and done, sort of a quick, flash in the pan. But it seems like you've continued to have sort of a presence on social media and continued this, I guess, movement, if you want to call it that. What was that all about in that regard?
So what happened was very soon on, like the first few days, the OU, the Orthodox Union, reached out to me. Rabbi Moshe Hauer, who's executive director, he actually was our Rav way back in Baltimore, B'nai Jacob Shari Zion. And he knew me, of course, and he wanted to support the efforts of my Orthodox life. So he felt there was value added. I worked with the OU and their PR team to put articles out in the secular media written by Orthodox women to provide a counter narrative. And they were super supportive, and it was really wonderful to have sort of like an institutional backing there. And then, once the whole thing died down, Rabbi Hauer, Moish Bain, who was the president at the time, we realized that this is just the beginning. We're done with the show, even though there was a season 2. Like, we're done. There's only so much. But what we have learned from the experience is that we need to be telling our stories as Orthodox Jews. And how are we going to do that? We're not we're not saying that we need a Netflix show about us. Happens to be Jewish matchmaking, I think. Having a Orthodox woman up there on the screen on Netflix is pretty remarkable. Who's a wonderful example of an Orthodox woman. But we're not necessarily saying that we need that. But we have a very powerful tool at our disposal, and that's social media. So the OU basically said next step is we would love to have you on board to create some kind of social media campaign that tells the story of Orthodox Jews. And it's been a tremendous privilege to be able to work with amazing creative professionals to create what we have now. It started a year ago, April. It's called Faces of Orthodoxy. It's designed for Instagram, but we're also on Facebook, and I share it on LinkedIn under my personal page, Alexandra Fleksher. And basically what it is, it's an account that shares the human stories of Orthodox Jews with the goal to put a human face on religious Jews. And we do that through beautiful portrait style photography. We hire the best photographers. We hire Orthodox Jewish photographers who are passionate about this project. Each season is located in a different city. So it's sort of regional based on the season. And we choose, 8 to 10 subjects per location. Right now, we're just finishing up the Atlanta season because I wanted to go back to my roots. So featuring some really interesting, colorful Orthodox Jews to tell our story.
And it's not only women, right? At this point.
Oh, men and women. Yeah, men and women. The idea, our target, we have two target audiences. One is certainly the secular world, the non-religious and the non-Jewish world, to expose them to the diversity amongst us. So often people who aren't exposed to Orthodox Jews, they think they're all Hasidic, and we're really highlighting people of all professions, ages, ethnicities, religious backgrounds, as we're trying to get as diverse as we can to show the world who we are, that we share universal struggles. We're humans, but we also have triumphs, and we don't shy away. If someone wants to share any kind of vulnerability, we want them to show that. And certainly what's happened is our second target audience is certainly Orthodox Jews, because like I said, with my Orthodox life, we're sort of all at risk when we are watching ourselves being so negatively portrayed in the media. That also can impact us. And what's happened with this is we have so many Orthodox Jews that are just so engaged. We've created this beautiful community of people who are just so, it's almost like a pride, campaign in a sense, that are just loving. Every week we post a new subject. I find the subjects, I interview them. They take the whole week. We have part one of their story on Monday, part two on Tuesday. We have reels. We have a lot of fun, interactive content. They provide their personal photos too. So in addition to the professional shots, you see their life story from, when their children still present. And people are just coming back for more and just cheering on subjects, cheering on when, overcoming challenges, all different things. And it's been I thought this was going to get hijacked because I know what happened with my Orthodox life. There were a lot of haters. You're showing that we're all perfect. What's going on? You should let OTD people who have left the path tell their stories, give them a break. And there's a lot of haters. And this, I was like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And it has been such a positive space. It's been just such a privilege for me to learn about all these amazing people and interview them and profile them and give them the spotlight. We're not like showing off celebrities. We're showing off like regular people in our midst, in our communities. So that's what we continue to do.
How are you identifying who to feature?
So often I do look for certain like professions. So for example, like right now we're actually starting our first shoot today in South Florida for our next season. And like one of the stories I wanted to tell is perspective of a real estate agent. South Florida just got vouchers. Things are booming. So I'm like, how cool. Let's get an Orthodox person who's a real estate. So that's easy. This is where I use social media. I have a huge network on social media. Hey, guys, nominations are open for the next season of Faces of Orthodoxy. I do that on LinkedIn, Facebook. People love it. They're like, sharing links and sharing, people they think would be great. So sometimes it's based on profession. Sometimes it's based on the type of story I wanted to tell. Like I want to represent someone who has a child with special needs. So I'm looking for a mother who's like an advocate, who can talk about that. So I'm always on the lookout. I've got tons of different criteria. They don't have to be like superstars. They just have to be able to be willing to share their journey of how they their religious journey, their personal journey, and professional journey.
Now, you mentioned criticism, because any meaningful project is not being criticized, then you're probably not making an impact, right? So, do you ever get accused of whitewashing or of portraying this, like you said, this perfect scenario, or and things like that, and from either people that have left the fold, so to speak, or just people that are within the fold but would like to see more of an emphasis on areas for improvement?
Okay, so we must not be doing a good job. And I've had this question before because I'm really not getting that. I'm really not getting that pushback. We're just like any day now hitting 10,000 followers, which is pretty strong for a Jewish social media account. I'll sometimes get like missionaries randomly, like JC stuff posted here and there. We have not gotten pushback from the Jewish community. We hardly get any pushback. Now, it could be it's because this is me, so they know me already and they already gave me pushback in my Orthodox life. They're like, oh, there's Alex doing her thing again, like we'll leave her alone this time. I don't know.
Well, it might also just be because you're focusing or you're highlighting individuals and their unique journeys instead of, you're not attacking issues, so to speak.
I think so.
You're just promoting individual stories, and it's a little bit more difficult to impeach those kinds of messages.
I think that's very true. It's a storytelling account. So you're going to go on there and like say something to insult the person that we're featuring in their journey. That's like, it's very personal. You know what I mean? And you're right. It's not issue based. It's really, there's so much, there's more humanity, I think, in the account, due to the very nature of the account. Yeah.
Now tell me a little bit about the podcast.
So I'm a co-host of the podcast, The Meaningful Conversation. This happened before my Orthodox life. And before Faces of Orthodoxy. So now I'm like professionally in like a really great space, honestly. I don't have to schlep out to school, go to a classroom. I work from home. I get to talk to amazing people for Faces of Orthodoxy, all from the comfort of my living room, as well as DMC, as well as the subjects that we interview. So like between these two major projects and my writing, I keep busy all day long. But DMC started really as a passion project during COVID. My co-host, Rivki Silver, she lives here in Cleveland. She's just like a 10-minute drive away. And I think this was like right when our kids started going back to school, like in masks era. And we wanted to basically provide a podcast for Orthodox women. There really wasn't a lot out there, where we started off with called Normal from Women, which we thought we were being cute and funny. But then when we rebranded, normal is a very, very loaded term. So we're like, let's just leave it alone. DMC, basically we start off the podcast, just you're listening to a DMC with friends. And that's the feedback we get. If people tell us we feel like we're like sitting and having coffee with best friends. We're not solely an interview-based podcast. Rivki and I will take a topic. We just did an interview about prayer with Sarah Blau, let's say. But the first third of the podcast is me and Rivki talking about our challenges, our struggles, our tips, just us schmoozing about it. And I think that's what our listeners really appreciate. Just having that's why we call ourselves Normal for Women. We're not Rebbitzins. We're just like regular ladies talking about any issue that like is relevant to us. And those are the topics that we come up with. It's like, what do we want to learn more about? What's something that we would schmooze about with our friend Shabbos afternoon? And then, of course, we bring on the expert, the Rebbitzin, the therapist, whatever, the author, and we get to pick their minds. So we learn so much about it. And Baruch Hashem, we've met with wonderful success. When we have a new episode where that's launched, we're, normally 6 or 7 on the Apple Judaism podcast chart. We're so grateful. And it's just, I think both of us, Rivki writes for family first, and I had a reputation at Mishpacha. And I think that's definitely part of our success, is we were names that people recognize. And I love it. I never see myself stopping. I really love it.
How often do you publish an episode?
So we publish every 2 weeks. What about you?
Good question. It's supposed to be, it started out weekly. And at this point, it's less frequent, simply just because I'm doing it all myself. Yeah. And like you said, it's a passion project for me as well. So yeah, not as frequent as I would like. It's a lot of work, to get the
It's a
guests,
lot of work.
do the interviews, editing, releasing, writing the note, all that stuff. So,
and you do that all yourself.
I do it all myself. Yeah.
Wow. So Rivki is super techie. I'm so blessed, and I am not. So she takes care of all the editing and the technical piece. She's actually a musician, so she wrote and recorded the music on our podcast. I do the behind the scenes, the script, and all of that part. Yeah, we actually have advertising now too. So it's not just a passion project, which we're very grateful for. So
and it's a very niche product. So I think it would be attractive to advertisers.
It is. This is a female podcast. You want to advertise your labels for camps. You want to advertise your appliances for your kitchen. An upcoming event gear for women. This is it. Come to us, DMC.
Fantastic. What's been like the most interesting or exciting episode that you've put out? I hate when people ask me that question, by the way.
Yeah.
But I'm going to ask it to you anyway.
Sure. I'll tell you, I'm dear friends. You may know her with Leslie Ginsburg, Dr. Leslie Ginsburg. She lives in Baltimore. Yeah. She has a PhD about the history of Jewish women's education in America, specifically the Beis Yaakov movement and how that translated Sarshner's legacy to, in America. We really try to give a variety of topics: self-help, marriage, parenting, social sciences, all different things. But having Leslie on, I think, was a little bit of a risk, because we're like, okay, we've had professors, but like psychology professors who will talk about grit, or burnout. But we never had anyone talking about history or any kind of academia. Now, I'm a huge fan of Leslie, so I'm like, we have to have Leslie, because Leslie takes her academic background and makes it so, as they say, lamaisa, so practical, with messaging for Orthodox women and Jewish women about, leadership through the legacy of Sarshir. So I knew that it would be that way. And we our title of it, I don't remember, the legacy of Sarshir for 21st century women. I don't remember what it was. But it was like, that episode to me was, I think, the most exciting, because we knew we were taking a risk and we weren't sure how it would be received, because it was different than what we had done in the past. But everyone loved it. And she was fabulous, as always.
Amazing. Are there any topics that have triggered a lot of interest, or made people really think or push back, or topics that you feel like, wow, we really hit a nerve here?
Yeah. So a few months ago, Rivki Silver, who is a momentum leader. She lives here in Cleveland, which is awesome. Yeah. We love when we have they're amazing women in Cleveland. So they get just to come sit around my dining room table and we can do the episode recording versus on Zoom. We love it. So Rivki, she's also a parenting coach, and she has a very beautiful family, a very diverse family, 7 children. A number of them are not religious. And she has so much to say about parenting. So we decided to do an episode with her about the things you never learned in parenting class, what's missing from parenting classes. And that did so well, because we like to take a little bit of a fresh approach. We don't just want cliche parenting episode. We want to talk about someone in the trenches who's a parenting coach, who has, adult children and children on all levels of observance, some not observant at all, to tell us your wisdom. What have you learned? What is not talked about enough? And she is incredibly articulate. She could talk about anything, and she's just going to get to the top of the charts because of who she is. But that really, really resonated with our listeners, that episode.
Alex, any other projects on the horizon for you? Whether it's social media or otherwise, or writing, maybe a book in the offing, possibly, or
I don't know. So I am just super excited that I am in the middle of editing a piece in Mishpacha right now. I haven't written for them in 6 months. So after this podcast, I need to go and respond to my editor. So I really, really want to continue my writing. I find I have 5 children, my day has to sort of end when the kids come home, from school, so I could somewhat be attentive. And I'm juggling a lot of projects with deadlines. We produce content daily for Faces of Orthodoxy, and it hasn't stopped week after week after week. We have over 50 faces that we've profiled. So, but the writing to me is something I'm just so grateful and passionate about, to have that audience. And I really feel like I need to commit myself to continuing that. I don't know. We want to make a coffee table book of Faces of Orthodoxy. I think that would be amazing. I would love to try to get this content out for people who are not on social media. And I think there's a lot of potential for this project. And please God, it should be, have continued success and open up more projects and more opportunities, through the work that we're doing.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alex Fleksher, the host of Deep Meaningful Conversations, the podcast, the proprietor or leader of
creative director.
Creative director. I was looking for that right term, and I needed a creative director to give me the term creative director. So the creative director of Faces of Orthodoxy, a writer, a speaker, dare I say an influencer, even if you don't love the term. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ari Koretsky. It was great talking to you.
This has been Ari Koretsky on Jews You Should Know. Please visit us at JewsYouShouldKnow.com and subscribe at iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you consume podcasts. Find us on social media at Jews You Should Know. If you'd like to become a supporter of this podcast, we would greatly appreciate that. And you can do so by visiting patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jews You Should Know. Finally, if you have enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review so that we can continue to grow and introduce many more people to Jews You Should Know.